Good afternoon. I'm Ilsa Connect, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Policy for the National Center for Victims of Crime. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to be talking today about fighting human trafficking with the power of forensic science. Before we get started with our speaker, I just have a few housekeeping issues to go over. Right now, you should be hearing audio coming through your computer speakers, so if you can't hear us well, you just try to turn your speakers up. And if you're having any trouble getting audio, you can send us a message in the question and answer box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, or you can call WebEx for technical support. Their number is 866-229-3239. As everybody signed on to the webinar today, you are muted and will not be able to ask questions verbally, but you can use the question and answer box to present questions to us. And questions are welcome at any time, but we will only answer them at the end of the webinar. This webinar today is brought to you by the National Center for Victims of Crime's DNA Resource Center. And we want to thank our sponsor, Thermo Fisher Scientific, who has been supporting our work on DNA for many years. The National Center's DNA Resource Center's goal is to increase awareness and understanding about how we can solve more crime and prevent more crime by maximizing the use of forensic DNA and DNA databases. So with the support of Thermo Fisher, we have conducted many webinars, over 20, maybe approximating 30 at this point. We've held trainings across the country, and we've developed materials about forensic DNA for victims and law enforcement professionals and other professionals who work with victims about the power of forensic DNA. And all of that information, including archived webinars, is available on our website at victimsofcrime.org/DNA. That's our DNA Resource Center address. This is my contact information if you'd like to email me with any questions or just to tell us how we're doing in our work or let us know about some interesting work that you're doing in your community. So now I want to go on to our main event with our speaker that we have today. We're thrilled to have Professor Timothy Palmbach from the Forensic Science Department at the University of New Haven. He is the Executive Director of the Henry Lee Institute on Forensic Science, and he served 22 years with the Connecticut Department of Public Safety, retiring as a major in charge of the Division of Scientific Services. His work focuses on the development and application of new technologies for crime scene analysis. And today we're going to hear about a project to bring human traffickers to justice using the power of forensic DNA. And so I want to go ahead and welcome Timothy to speak to us today, and I will get him set up here with his slides. There we go. Okay. All right, Timothy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
hey,
great.
Elsa, thank
you.
Go
ahead and take the floor.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for giving us some of your time, and thank you to the National Center and as well as Thermo Fisher for making this possible. Obviously, today the topic is always focused on DNA when it's coming out of this group, but also very much focused on human trafficking and the problem of human trafficking. And hopefully what many of you will agree is a good possible solution to help our efforts in our battle against human trafficking. So that's really where I'm heading today. What I know I can't resolve for you is a very long explanation of what human trafficking is. And looking at the attendee list, some of you know far more about this than I will, and some of you maybe less. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction on the problem, and then encourage you to go read about it if you don't know anything about it, because it's just downright depressing and just enormous. It's a global problem for sure. Certain countries, regions are worse than others, but there's not a single country, including the U.S., that can honestly say they don't have a human trafficking problem. And when we're talking about human trafficking, we're really talking about all forms of it. We most commonly think of the sexual exploitation, which is certainly a big and horrific part of it, but slave labor, forced labor, domestic servitude are all elements of human trafficking. And what we're really talking about is taking a person and by force, fraud, or coercion, enslaving them in one of these activities against their will. Again, you'll see it's enormous. The numbers are really difficult to get our arms around. the best guesses are anywhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 million people at some level currently enslaved, which is just crazy large. And many of the victims are children and the most vulnerable, which is certainly something for us to pay attention to as well. One of the realities of what's driving this, and it's certainly going to become a focus point of what I'm talking about today, is it's organized crime and big business at the end of the day. And so any really effective solution that we're going to have is going to have to address the fact that it is in fact organized crime and big business, and that it's a network, and we're going to have to find a way to make it less profitable, more difficult for them to do their business, and kind of get them out of the business. You know, unfortunately, we're seeing the same clientele of people who've made money in the drug trade and illegal weapons and even terrorism, finding this as a means to make quick money to further their other criminal endeavors. So anything we can do in the area of human trafficking not only will help rescue those who are enslaved and stop this crime, but we'll also have a lot of other good social and criminal justice impact. My slide here, just a quick note, I thought this one is one of the most provocative bits of information. And it's really one of the problems. Today, it is unbelievably cheap to purchase the commodity, otherwise known as a human being, which many of these occasions it becomes a commoditized market. And the costs are as low as $90. And contrast that to the American slave trade. It was very expensive in order to acquire a slave, basically $40,000 in today's money. So that's going to answer one of the questions is why can't we stop this? And because the supply is just too prevalent and really downright too cheap. For those who don't know much about it, there is a lot of good reports out there. One of the great ones is the State Department's annual tip report. I believe it was just 2 days ago, or Friday, the State Department issued their 214 Trafficking in Persons report, otherwise known as a tip report. And you can get it online. It's a free download, and I'd ask you to go ahead and do that at some point if you're not familiar with it, because it's a good source over what's going on and what is our current objectives and what do the different countries look like. And you'll see a map that looks somewhat similar to this map, and it's color-coded. And basically, it'll lay out who's doing good, who's doing bad, and who's doing just honestly nothing in the area of their fight against trafficking. But again, as I said, it's really important to note that everybody can do more and needs to do more, and systematically, globally, we got to come up with a better way to deal with this. Another area that I don't really have time to discuss today, but it's really worth looking into, and many of you have done a lot of good research on this, is why slavery exists today. And there's some good arguments about there and some difference of opinions. At the end of the day, I think we can agree to disagree where we have to, but we have to all agree it's just too large of a problem, and it's something we need to address. I'd like to highlight two of the last bullet points on this slide, which I think are worth talking about today. One is lack of resources. Clearly, in third world developing countries, without a doubt, they have a lack of resources across the board. They have baseline poverty, so they're not necessarily worried about putting modern tools against fighting trafficking. But in places even like the U.S., we have enormous resources and capacities, and honestly, we're just not dedicating enough of them at this particular point to really be as effective as we can against war and trafficking. And with that, I think amazingly enough, there's still a fair amount of apathy that goes along with a mention of putting extra resources in this crime. And I hope that all of us can kind of help get the message out there, and apathy is something we can change. So what can be done to stop it? The bottom line is there's been a lot of good work, and I do not want to be one who's sitting here saying nobody's doing anything, because that's not wrong. It's amazing what people have accomplished, both governments and federal agencies as well as NGO groups. They've done a lot. But when we really look at the numbers, the count, the big picture, we're not making a lot of gains. And in fact, in a lot of the classical places that were inundated with sexual exploitation, Cambodia, Thailand, the Philippines, we've seen that, up to and nearly 90% of the girls who were rescued at some point end up homeless, back on the street, or back in the business, or re-victimized. And equally enough, Marius, is those brothels and the places of abuse, we can close them for a day, they seem to reopen, and for every girl we take out, they find another one to replace. So we really do have to find a different mechanism, and the mechanism is going to have to be really focused, again, on going after the actual network itself. Often people will say, oh, so you're in the demand side of this. That's the focus you're coming at. And my response is no. And I further say, I don't know that we can stop the demand. It's the bottom line is where poverty and vulnerability and an easy way for organized crime to make money exists, it's going to be really difficult to stop it. And then you add to that simply bad behavior. Bad behavior, unfortunately, mainly by men, and also within some social classes and cultures where they've just accustomed to looking down at people or accepting different statuses of people, which allow for a slave-based environment. On the supply side, I think we've already dealt with that. There is just way too many people, way too vulnerable, and it's way too profitable. And so a supply side shutdown isn't going to work. Therefore, I go back to what my early hypothesis was that we have to figure out a way to go after the network, attack it, make it less profitable, and take it apart. And that, unfortunately, is a big commitment. You're talking not about a reactive case. It's about a long-term, proactive, highly evolved investigative strategy. And in that strategy, one of the tools that's really going to come into play is going to be the use of DNA, and I'll continue with that in a minute. I've been doing this and talking about this for a little over a year now, and one of the comments that comes back, and it's a fair one, is they said, well, most of what you talk about is overseas in third world country, and how does that apply to the United States? My comment is, well, what I do know is what I've been commonly told and what I've commonly encountered, which does relate to the United States, is the following, is that investigators are having a hard time actually finding the victims and then identifying them as a victim. If they're able to do that, then they hit the problem of getting victim cooperation. And there's a million reasons why, but basically the traffickers have brainwashed them and coerced them and convinced them that law enforcement is the bad guy. And it's very difficult to get their cooperation. And then even if they do, they say that their number one priority is always to prove the crime of trafficking, which means they have to show the elements of force, fraud, or coercion, or at a baseline just show that the victim was a minor, was underage, and that takes all of their efforts. Very often they are reactive in nature. They get a complaint, it's brought before them, they conduct an investigation, a good investigation, and hopefully they make an arrest. What we're talking about and need to do is really go the next step and look at building a series of investigations over a protracted period of time so that you can begin to get enough evidence that you could substantiate taking down a whole network. And then you bring in the value of some investigative tools like RICO and taking some of their assets. Look at as an analogy some of the high-level drug investigations that we've been successful with as a country. So the goal is, again, to move more to a proactive or a disruptive kind of a model. And I believe as I go through this presentation, although several of the examples will be overseas, actually most of them will be internationally based, I think you can connect the dots and see the relevance to the U.S. problems as well, if that's where your focal point is. Our major outcomes or hopes of this work is that we can increase arrests and convictions. And if you look at the data, overall those numbers are low. They're really, really low. And given the volume of the amount of cases and victims we see, our prosecution rates are quite low. One of the main reasons is that we very rarely have no victims, incapable victims, or uncooperative victims. And so we're going to try to bolster some of those cases with physical evidence and the use of DNA to help substantiate what took place, and then also to help the victims themselves, to take a little bit of the burden away from them. I'm not advocating in any capacity that we no longer need victim testimony. It is always ideal. We should always strive for it. But let's look to create a model where we can bolster what their testimony will be with the value of physical evidence. And then, as I've talked about, if we can look at linking many cases together, we can utilize the power of lots of bits of information coming from multiple different cases in order to make a much stronger case and then ultimately, hopefully, take the network down. And so a lot of times I'm going to talk about the victims, our desire to not re-victimize them and to move forward in a way that's as protective and caring for them as we possibly can. Obviously, forensic science is going to play a role in this as well. So let's talk specifically about DNA. And by the way, there are fingerprints and high-level isotope analysis. There's certainly other forensic tools. I will not talk about them today. we'll talk simply about DNA analysis. What does it do? Number one, it gives an identity to a victim. Victims of trafficking, one of the number one things they lose is their identity. They're stripped usually of their documentation, whether it be passports or identification cards. They're either moved without identification or they're supplied with false identification, but they very quickly lose the very nature of who they are. That makes it very hard for investigators, and it certainly makes it traumatic on them. The reality is that you can't steal somebody's DNA profile, and so that becomes one of our focus areas, is that it is an identification point that stays with them for life regardless of where they move. I also said, in repeating, we want to try to assist the victims in their testimony by bolstering it with physical evidence and the analysis of evidence. I also want to point out that DNA can be used as an investigative lead, and not only in the area of human trafficking, but property crimes, homicides, other kinds of crimes, violent crimes in the United States and other countries. We often we forget that. We look at it as a mechanism to prepare us for trial, to focus in on our final suspect and move a case into the arrest and prosecution phase. But DNA can be used very early on and have a very powerful effect on helping investigators move to the next level. And later on I'm going to talk about the use of rapid DNA analysis, and one of the major values for rapid DNA analysis is its capacity to help in the investigative process very, very early on. Obviously it will also help in the investigations as well. In addition to identifying victims, it can be used to identify perpetrators, and we can do this both in an obvious capacity. If we have a crime sample or an evidence sample and they're a member of CODIS or another database, well, we'll obviously get a correlation. But we could also build local databases, and we can also, in an investigative capacity, obtain a DNA profile of a suspect or a potential offender and use that again in an investigative capacity. Lastly, we'll talk about at the end databases, and of course DNA is not only as valuable as a database, but a database management is a huge part of this. And this is going to be an area where we're all going to have to be patient, and we're all going to have to allow for some changes, and it's certainly frustrating that many of the countries and jurisdictions are going to need to do some legislative changes and move into an environment where they can utilize DNA databasing, but it is just a necessity that's going to happen. So what kind of samples did we take a look at and did we consider in our work? Obviously you have the known buccal samples from victims. They can be analyzed in any variety of ways, and rapid DNA, as I mentioned, is a great use of a real easy mechanism for doing known victim buccals. But we can also gather up some evidence from crime scenes or the brothels or locations where these victims have been located and exploited. We can also get some of these samples in an undercover capacity, which I'll highlight as I do a few examples here in a few minutes. And there's also a great long-term need, I believe, and use for the immigration and border control systems to utilize DNA for identification purposes and immigration purposes, and at the same time, it'll have a really profound effect in curbing trafficking and identifying trafficking victims. So, collection of samples. Some people said, how do you get a girl who's still trapped in the environment in a brothel or in a location as a trafficking victim to give you a known buccal? And the simple answer is we ask for them to volunteer, and it's honestly that simple. It may be a little more tricky to get there in and out of the environment without creating a problem for them, but their voluntary compliance is quite simple. Very often, if they think there's anything that they can do to help their positioning, they're very willing to do it. Other types of samples, in addition to the buccal swabs, are on objects that come in contact with either the victims, or if we're going to switch over our focus and try to look at offenders, objects from them. And so we evaluated swabbings that we obtained in the field during undercover operations. So, we proved that we could do it quickly and covertly. We did straws and glasses and beer bottles and phones and cigarette butts, and had very, very good success in removing swabs and getting successful DNA profiles from them. Ultimately, we would want to get into, at the end of an investigation, to a brothel area or an area where the women are held and so often abused, and do basic crime scene processing and look at bedding and clothing for multiple samples to establish that there are countless offenders that participated in the exploitation of each of these victims. So let's first talk about the issue of identification and DNA as a positive means of identification. And I'm just going to highlight just a quick story or what we ran into up in Poland very recently. Poland has a pretty large Romanian gypsy problem. They move into now, particularly with the EU regulations, the border controls a bit more open, and they move in quite easily. And they set up encampments, and the gypsies themselves are at risk, and then, of course, they engage in some of them are engaging in criminal activities and problems for the host country, for example, like Poland. Their current methodology for tracking them as they move through do some site inspections is electronic portable document and passport scanning. And the reality is, in talking with them, is that in the population that we were looking at here, there's Krakow, which is, by the way, these encampments were focused right outside of Krakow, Poland. And actually here, before I go on, I'm sorry, is an example of where you'll see the gypsies, many of them very small children that will come into a major city like Krakow for the daytime hours. The younger children are more or less into a forced begging environment. And they'll be in the city 12, 13, 14 hours, somewhat watched, but obviously unaccompanied as they are instructed and in many cases forced to engage in begging. But the encampments, again, are loosely and easily constructed and deconstructed shelter areas so they can move. Again, the Gypsy Roma people are quite nomadic and have been so for hundreds of years. And so during a security check to see who's in the camps and who's not in the camps and try to make an identification. At the moment, their current only tool is portable passport and document scanning. And their best guesses, the law enforcement officials in the area, is that, well, not guesses, about half these people don't have identification cards, so that's not going to be effective. And for those who do, there's a fairly prolific black market for false documentation. So it's proving to be not a very reliable method for tracking. And it was a great opportunity for us to say, this is exactly the kind of a system or a problem that a DNA databasing system could help with, particularly if you have an identified clientele and a population that's going to be at risk, and you have checkpoints or border points where you could do a DNA scan if necessary to confirm an individual's identity and figure out whether they're wanted or missing or otherwise of interest. And again, these villages, it's not just a law enforcement reality. It's a human rights issue. You'll see the car that's directly in the foreground of this photograph. There were 3 children in it. One included a 6-month-old baby, and they sleep in the cars. It's the safest and warmest possible environment for them in the way they live. So there are some substantial service needs to these individuals in addition to legitimate law enforcement or immigration needs. So a biometric system of some level is really what's going to be of value in identifying individuals and the movement of individuals, and the movement of human trafficking victims is very often transnational, and it would be very, very important to be able to confirm and affirm who they are. And it can be done through a variety of biometric data systems, fingerprint, facial identification, iris scanning, or DNA. And particularly when we're talking about DNA, which can be in a portable fashion and can be utilized with minimum amounts of training, which is really the very nature of what a rapid DNA system is. So let me add to what we just discussed, the value of DNA for identification. Now let's talk about, let's go the next step and use that information to help determine transit routes. And that is ultimately, where did victims originate from? Where are they moving through? where are the locations where they're being victimized, and where will they eventually end up. And the value of that is it can help create associations for us in our investigations if we're talking about investigating and taking down a network. And it can also help in just identifying the victims should they, should we need to find them, or they become victims of violent crime, or they are indeed trafficking victims and are going to be subject to rescue operations along the way. And it will also, again, tie into a variety of other interesting investigative needs, and we'll see as we go. So I'll take a look at the country of Nepal here. It is a perfect example of a fairly poor country, lots of poverty. They've had a lot of social unrest. They're really just very recently had a new wave of elections and are trying to figure out who they are and who they're going to be becoming. They've still got to create a constitution for the country, and so they've got a long way to go. But because of all that, they are obviously a country at risk, and their citizens are highly likely to become victims of trafficking, and many do. So the country is situated between China and India. One of the major problems here is a more or less wide open border on the Nepal-India line, and you'll see that tragically the tale for many of the sexual exploited victims is a pathway out of the rural villages of Nepal and ultimately into India, into some of the most historic and violent and deadly Indian brothels, where most of these kids and women are not going to make it out alive. Nepal, like many of Southeast Asia, one of the attributes which draws some of the pedophiles and sexual tourists is it's fairly easy to get access to fairly young victims. There's not a lot of urbanized, or shall we say, built up, more progressive environments. This is Kathmandu, which is the major hub and capital. But it doesn't take very long to get outside of the hub of that and realize that most of the countryside is very inaccessible. It's small pockets of villages tucked in along the greater Himalayas and other mountain chains. Many of the villages don't even have dirt road access. You could take several days of hike to get in and out. And yet, having said that, the traffickers have made a very successful living out of going to those very isolated, desolate villages and convincing the families that are just really struggling to find the food to make it through the day, to feed the multiple children that they have, which is common in a farming community. And so they come with a false hope of either sell and or give us your daughter, your child, and we can move them into a better world and a better environment. And with great reluctance, many of the families do so. And as many of us know, that's not where they end up, and that's not the end of the story by a long shot. Many of them will move into an intermediate village area within Nepal, and this is an example of one. It's a transit station. There's a lot of activity and movement through there, and so it's probably one of the first areas where the girls will be subject to life in a brothel, where their now realization of a better life not happening is going to be concluded. Occasionally, some of them still seem to stay out of that, which is wonderful. And if you see in the photo on the right, there's a couple of young kids who row their boat 3 hours a day each way to get to school. And so that, the hope is that social services can provide an ability for kids like that to make it in a otherwise somewhat difficult environment. But in that same small village that I showed you, that transit station, there was one small bus park area, and in that small bus park area, there was 50 of these, which are commonly referred to as cabin restaurants. And within those 50 cabin restaurants, our last poke through and evaluation through, there was about 500 women and children, young women, trapped into sexual exploitation. Life in a cabin restaurant is bleak, to say the least. No doors, no windows, no access. They work 7 days a week. They're exploited 5 to 10 times a day, maybe more if they're young and more marketable. Maybe they'll be fed, maybe they won't be fed. They'll maintain enough substance to keep them alive because they need to be alive for them to be profitable. But it's an exceedingly bleak and dark existence for these girls. With the help of NGOs and some government officials, we were able to collect some data over a period of years and do some data analysis. And this is the kind of work that needs to be done, and it's also the kind of work that works extremely well with the DNA database. So here's a country in Nepal, and you'll see some density nodes, and those are basically depicted to you as orange and yellow. And what they show is the high prevalence rates for trafficking victims. And you can see that the majority of them now are congregated along the border, either on the southeast corner near the Chinese border, or certainly along the entire India-Nepal border. But if you look more carefully, you'll see some red dots distributed all above that. And those represent the areas or the regions from where these girls originated. Now, looking at that in a different viewpoint, we'll look at it now as clusters or transit routes. So the same data now portrays to us a better picture of what's taking place. And what it's showing is, again, that these girls are originating, or children are originating from the village, rural areas, being migrated to more urbanized, condensed areas. There's mainly 5, you'll see them along the border between mainly Nepal and India, but also over in the corner with Nepal and China. And then from there, a good percentage of them are moved fairly seamlessly across the border into India. Now, the reason I showed those transit routes is because as we talk about DNA and the ability of DNA to be valuable, I just want you to imagine that, if we had access, and particularly access, although there's many occasions where rapid DNA is not going to be the only answer, but let's assume we had access to a fast DNA analysis and or a rapid DNA analysis. If we understand the routes and we understand where the girls originated, where they're traveling to, and where they terminate, anywhere along those routes where we can set up a legitimate checkpoint and monitoring system is an area where we can effectively use DNA to help stop the transit and then hopefully have a long-term effect on trafficking as well. The other value of it, this is more of the investigative side. As you begin to identify locations and traffickers, you can identify people. As you identify people, you can identify target nodes, and so you can create an individual network like this. And as you can see, there are a few nodes where if we focused on them, by taking out or focusing investigative efforts on just a few people, we actually could, in a major way, disrupt the network. Now, it's not going to stop it overnight, but it will do far, far, far more good to disrupt the network than just randomly picking any particular trafficker or node, which is not in a strategically important position. So let's talk about flipping the coin and now using the power of DNA to either target and or help in investigations and going after the offenders. And a country I'll reference here is Costa Rica, and I'm just going to move through this fairly quickly. But this is a country which is beautiful, it's wonderful, but also has problems with sexual tourism. And many of the girls are quote-unquote voluntary engaged in it. In fact, their parents know they're engaging in it, but by virtue of the fact that they're actually 16 years old, it is illegal. And so even Costa Rican law has jurisdiction against it, and of course, with the Trafficking and Victim Protection Act, our expatriates who go there to engage in sex tourism and engage in it with underage females are also going to be subject to it. We also have at-risk populations like the Transvestite population who are on the street, who in the worst of situations and almost without exception are going to become victims of violent crime. And so one of the values of a DNA network is it can assist in the investigation, which are almost likely to arrive from the victimization of these individuals. Here's an example of a publicly accessible document. Again, I'm not going to encourage you to go Google sexual tourism in Costa Rica, but if you were so inclined and you don't get yourself in trouble with your employer or your wife, and you promise me you're not doing it for all the wrong reasons, you'll be amazed what's out there. Here's an example of some document that's out there. It shows some brothel locations in San Jose. During our assessment visit down there, we corroborated that about 90% of this was actually accurate. So it shows the problem of the internet and how it's becoming very difficult, and in some capacity it's helpful for us because we can also monitor the internet, but it's making it so much easier to point people in the right direction. There are a few hotels in Costa Rica that are exclusively designed for the sex tourism business, and unashamedly so. This one, you find it quite easily on your own, and it is nothing more than a very large-scale brothel, and here's an image of a bunch of expats in there. There was some belief or statement that they did not honestly believe, the government that we were working with, that there was a high prevalence of underage girls, and it took us something less than 60 minutes to get an offer for 14-year-old girls. So it is prevalent, and obviously that is something that any government, including Costa Rican government, really would want to take action against. Another area in Costa Rica gets more complicated, and this is more of a rural community where the parents voluntarily bring their children from the village areas into these structures that are more or less a modern brothel on the weekends, and knowingly allow their children to be exploited starting around age 13, 14. We also, part of our work was to determine whether or not we really could obtain DNA samples during active undercover investigations so we wouldn't endanger personnel, the girls, or investigations. The short answer to that is complicated, but indeed possible. And some of the samples that we found to be of value, in addition to objects of touch, and again, it would depend upon the particular country and the laws of the country, and whether or not the discarding of trash, as we commonly call in American law enforcement, a trash grab or trash pull is legal. If it is a mechanism whereby you could, through surveillance, target a potential offender like a pedophile, see him in contact with younger girls, and then a very good example where you could use DNA analysis, ideally rapid DNA analysis, to at least show that that individual had contact with some of these underage girls, and particularly if they are a foreign national and had the ability to head out of that country and back to an area where they're not likely to be investigated or extradited, it can be of extreme value for a country like Costa Rica to be able to have that kind of a tool. One of the realities is there's been a lot of changes. Many of the companies and the DNA providers, they're all been really very supportive in these efforts. And again, Thermo Fisher has been very kind to promote these webinars. But they've done a lot to help out with real practical solutions, and something as simple as creating a swab that is very easy for field use, and it's self-contained in the saline compartments there, and it's self-drying, and in a matter of a few hours, that swab can be dried and stored at room temperature, and degradation is minimized. And it may not seem like a big deal, but some of those recent changes in the field have made it possible to move into some of these countries and collect samples and keep them at room temperature, and in many cases they'll have to be shipped back to the United States or to another jurisdiction for testing. So some of these recent advances have really been very helpful. So let me talk a little bit about rapid DNA analysis here, and this is basically a small one-stop shopping box. It's a desktop model, very simple to operate, and all of the classical different components from extraction to purification to amplification and then analysis are taking place in one single box. Rapid DNA has had good value and good use for law enforcement and military purposes, and we can see the utility for immigration and human trafficking as well. It is important to know. This technology is doing wonderful. It's well underway in validation testing. The results are outstanding, but we're not there yet. It still has a few more steps, a few more validations. The belief is we'll make those hurdles. It'll surpass and prove its validity. And a greater hope is someday, maybe even to the capacity, we'll see it as something that could be compliant for some of our larger databases. But in the meantime, it is still a very effective mechanism for collecting samples and can be very effective for investigative purposes. For those who aren't familiar with it, again, it's a single one-box machine. You take the basic tubes collected in the field, put them into your biochip set. This particular unit will use five of the tubes, and then a technician, which is, again, a fairly very easy, low training level requirement in order to operate the machine, can go ahead and load the cartridge, insert into the unit, close the door, and patiently wait 84 minutes in order to get a result. So you'll get either a no result, or you'll get the indication of a successful result within 84 minutes. Here again is the kind of beauty of these systems and the technology behind it. Again, the recent advances in these systems, and there's really two companies that are really out there. One is NetBio, one is Energenics, and they're both working really hard to use current methodologies and current chemistry. A lot of the life science products now have been integrated into these systems, so they're really making some big headway. Here's some of the electropherograms or the data of our tests, and just to show, particularly for the DNA community, you're really getting out the back end what you expect to get out the back end. It's not much different than if you'd run over to your 3500 STR platform and did a run. And we were getting good, consistent results from buccal swabs, cigarette butts, drinking glasses, straws, and very amazingly good results on a variety of very different types of samples. And again, it was, and we were even able to get some decent samples from the condoms. Of course, you had to be very careful to swab, internally, externally, separately, and what we found, which is not hard to believe, is that because these girls are victimized so many times a day, you're going to get mixture-based samples, and of course, a mixture-based sample at this point is not amenable for rapid DNA analysis. You'll have to rely on a more traditional methodology. And having said that, some of the other methodologies, might be a white STR analysis, or just another platform which is very good at low copy number or trace amounts of DNA. Although I think many of us are just so happy with the success we've already seen with rapid DNA that we're really hopeful that it's going to just continue to grow and expand in its capacities and capabilities. But again, you may hit mixture cases, multiple offenders, multiple victims, and the best way to deal with it is through a platform such as a YSTR analysis. So even though I've highlighted rapid DNA technologies, it's important and it's fair to say that all of the DNA platform and all the DNA technologies are really going to be needed in the evaluation and the analysis of physical evidence relating to and associated with human trafficking, and perhaps even mitochondrial. Unfortunately, there are, and this is true even in Mexico right now, many of the trafficking victims never make it out alive, and so there's grave sites and discarded remains, and so much of the missing person and identification plans and cases really are, in fact, nothing more than the final chapter in a human trafficking victim. And so in that particular case, a technology like mitochondrial DNA analysis may prove to be a better tool, or maybe perhaps, in fact, the only evidence that we can garnish from a scene or a brothel area is a hair, and so that may be another source of sample. So let's talk about databases. And again, At the moment, if you're in the platform of Rapid DNA Technologies, you're not going to be in CODIS. You're not going to be in any Europol or any of those databases. You're going to have to be utilizing a local area network or a local area database, but that can still have great utility. And particularly if used in an investigative format, it can be in fact quite powerful, and it shouldn't be something that's readily dismissed. To the extent that we are, law enforcement is actually involved in an investigation of a criminal activity, then of course traditional SDR-based methods can be employed, and things like a CODIS search can be utilized. So, databases are at the moment very effective in the fight against human trafficking. One of the things which I've found and been very dismayed about is much like the United States had to go through the struggle to convince the naysayers that their concerns over privacy with DNA databases were more or less based out of a misunderstanding of the system or the reality, and that with some education we were able to show them that privacy concerns were really well accounted for, and the types of things they were worried about, they really did not need to be worried about. But it seems as if, in the most part, many of the countries, the foreign countries that are going to begin to adopt this methodology are going to have to face those same struggles, and they're going to have to start with education and awareness, and then legislation, and then finally move into building a database system on their own. For those who are a little less familiar, just very quickly, a DNA database system does not contain the name or an identification that's directly linking to a known human being. It is also not the kind of genetic information that's going to tell you an individual's eye color or race or ethnicity or the fact that they're at risk for a particular disease. While DNA as a greater entity can do that, the DNA profiles for forensic DNA purposes do not. And there have been and are really, really strict access points and dissemination points and controls in place that one really does not need to worry about the integrity of DNA database data. Again, local databases, DNA databases are an option. There are companies out there with software platforms that can help create some of these small searchable local databases. So even at that level, a country can begin to do work, and I think particularly in the area of human trafficking, can begin to use DNA and a local database to have some real utility. Finally, we have begun to do some of our work in conjunction with other existing projects, and I'll point out one of them, for example, is DNA Pro Kids, and DNA Pro Kids is very much the brainchild of Jose Laurentia from University of Granada, and very much also of Artie Eisenberg down at UNT. And they've done a marvelous job at using DNA to kind of clean up and regulate and identify the problems in the adoption industry, basically trafficked babies in the adoption industry, and had tremendous success in Guatemala. And so much so that in our dealings with them, we've begun to share with them how much more valuable their work could be with an increased database. And the increased database, of course, is going to occur from better on-the-ground efforts, either through law enforcement or skilled and trained NGO groups capable of working in local communities to help build relevant and local databases. So that is, again, a very good, or hopefully good, but I know a very quick overview for you on what I believe is a real powerful tool. For those of you in the United States in law enforcement or laboratory structures, I would challenge you and your organizations to look at use of DNA as a mechanism to help resolve some of your problems. I'd also challenge you to look at the concept of moving to more of a proactive model and less of a reactive model. And for many of you, I know that's something you would do and beyond your choice. The powers above are the ones that are going to make those decisions. And maybe as we all get this information out there, we'll will help them see the value of DNA and DNA analysis in our fight against human trafficking. For any of you who would like, please feel free to contact me. Criticism, comments, thoughts, I welcome every bit of it. This is certainly a learning curve for me, and I think for most of us as well. Thank you for the time. I will now pass this back to Ilsa, who will field your questions, and I'll be glad to try to address anything that you have of concern. Ilsa.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tim. We have one question, which is about cost. She says that the cost per sample is $350 using rapid DNA. And so basically, and instruments are expensive as well. Where do you see the funding coming from for these projects?
Yes, and she's exactly correct, and cost is a real issue. Keep in mind, this is an emerging technology. It has not been integrated into the field, into the system in a large format yet, only because it's an emerging technology. And so it's always cost with volume is the issue. And so you're at the very, very expensive end of this technology. And as it's developed and integrated, the cost is going to go down. I can't guess what it will be, but I mean, if we follow historically what we've seen in the DNA community, and as we've seen a new platform arise at high cost, we've watched it go down. We're all confident that that's going to be the case as well. To answer your second part of the question, funding. Yes, yes, and yes. This is the sad reality. There is a lot of work to be done. In our short amount of work, we have 6 countries that we've completed assessments. We have collaborative agreements with the governments. We have plans in place. They're excited, and we simply are at a standstill with being able to really move forward and helping them at the next level, absolutely because of funding. And I know our own federal agencies are facing the same problem of too much work and not enough funding to do it. So I wish I could give you an answer and tell you to go to the following, site for funding, but I think the short answer is across the board, the amount of funding that's available for virtually everybody within this field is insufficient, and we need to get that message to our to Washington and to those who have some ability to make some funding decisions and say we need help. I know it's not a great answer. That's just the honest truth.
It's true. Next question is this method being used in the United States, especially the highest risk states?
Not yet. The short answer is not to the scope that I've laid out here, and certainly not that we're aware of. Now, that is not to say, because I know that it is true, and then certainly cases that I know that both Homeland and the FBI have worked on have utilized DNA in human trafficking cases. Dallas, actually, Fort Worth, Dallas had an interesting project where they were taking some samples from at-risk victims in their community. So it has begun. I will say that with very few exceptions, though, it has not been fully embraced. The tools are there, and it's yet for jurisdictions to make the choice. And again, you are making a choice because there are only so many investigators and so many dollars, and to do the type of investigations with the scope and magnitude and time duration that we've laid out, that in and of itself is extremely expensive. I think a lot of times people just look at the cost of DNA, but a long-term proactive investigation definitely costs money. And my guess is that many jurisdictions are again back to some they don't know about it, haven't really thought it through well enough to implement it. Others are stuck with a cost problem as well.
Right. And wasn't there a project somewhere, I think you may have mentioned Dallas area, where they were using DNA with women who were working as prostitutes? That's right. And then the same issue basically, but that project, can you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah. I mean, my understanding of that project is their whole use of it was just to create a database of these women because they assumed correctly that many of them would become victims of a violent crime and/or trafficked in transition and then become a missing person, and so that having a voluntary known profile to search against should they go missing or become the victim of violent crime was of great benefit, which it was. So and that certainly is one prong of what we've talked about here as a use of DNA. They did not integrate that into an investigative model where they proactively and through undercover mechanisms were targeting offenders and using it as an investigative tool.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple more questions. Going back to the rapid issue, is it true that rapid DNA instruments will only do reference samples and not mixtures, such as with touch DNA samples?
Well, what they will do is they will not, at this point, do mixtures. That's correct. They'll do single source samples. There is no, I mean, we as part of our just experimentation did touch-based systems. You know, again, we did straws, glasses, cigarettes, interesting things, and got very good results. There's some basic data on that in an article I put out in the Croatian Journal of Medicine that came out a couple months ago they could reference back to. So, yes, it was effective. Now, again, it's really important to know this. It's still in a validation step. You know, don't run out by it and think that it's casework ready tomorrow, because we're not quite there yet. I think we'll get there. And I also firmly believe that, you know, the current manufacturers and researchers are very much aware of the mixture problems and the need for lower and lower copy number thresholds, and are working toward answers to those solutions. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see rapid DNA doing far more than it currently can, and hopefully not too far down the road.
Great. Okay, we have a few more questions. Let's see. What happens to the families that are aware of their child participating in human trafficking?
Well, you know, it crosses the range. You have, for example, like in Costa Rica, they're complicit in it. You know, they're fully aware of it. They help facilitate it, and they've accepted it. And unfortunately, it probably becomes more of a generational or societal problem. You know, they do it, I guess we have to do it. I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, that's a much bigger social issue that I can wrap my head around solving. I think a lot of the, you know, many of the trafficking victims are basically brought in by fraud. You know, they're promised something else, a job, an opportunity, and that something else doesn't pan out. They end up in a sexual exploitation. So I think to the extent that families are aware of that and facilitating that, they've been sold a bill of goods, and you know, maybe they would not have done that. In other occasions, maybe they suspect it, but it's blind desperation. You know, you're talking some of these communities, third world environments where poverty and social, you know, and life situations are so extreme that they'll blindly or maybe not so blindly take a chance.
This, I think, is a really important question, because one of the things we try to do at the DNA Resource Center is, you know, dispel myths and misconceptions about the use of DNA and DNA profiles and DNA databases and what they contain and what they don't contain. So she says, you mentioned that there were no privacy concerns because DNA databases do not include identifying information, but assert that DNA analysis of victims is beneficial because it can establish the identity of the victim. So maybe we need to talk just a minute about DNA profiles a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so the reality is, I think the worry is that somebody unauthorized is going to go into a DNA database and steal your, your known profile, or some hacker is going to jump in some way and he's going to steal them and use them for illegal or improper purposes. But the systems are so structured that you know, in the files where the actual DNA profile data is located, it's not co-linked. It's linked to a secure number, and that number then is outside of that file environment, is then at some point linked to an actual individual. And for that linkage, the way most of the DNA systems are set up, there's very restricted, very secure access to it. So the ability to ultimately long-term match a sample back to a known person can occur, but it cannot occur in a PC, you know, in a particular profile. And I think, you know, that's what people are worried of is inappropriate or unauthorized access to that connecting information, and there's a lot of security systems put in place to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, thanks so much. And there's a lot of information on our website at the DNA Resource Center about DNA and DNA databases and privacy issues. We have some FAQ documents, and in fact, we do have a webinar we did years ago just called DNA 101. So I think that's a really helpful webinar just to watch about some of the basics and understanding how the databases work. So I think we are basically out of time. I want to thank you so much, Tim, for doing this webinar. It's been great already getting lots of comments from people saying thank you so much for a very informative webinar. It was recorded, and the PowerPoints, along with the recording, will be posted on our website in a couple of days. If you want a certificate to show that you attended the webinar, you can email us webmaster@ncvc.org. I also want to let you know that on Wednesday at 1 o'clock we have another webinar about the Rape Kit Action Project. And on that webinar we'll be talking about the problem of untested rape kits and some of the policy solutions that we're seeing at the federal and at the state level. So that's Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and you can sign on or sign up for that at the DNA Resource Center website, which of course is victimsofcrime.org/DNA. And I have a slide here which should be giving you the, it's not doing it. Okay, well anyway, victimsofcrime.org/DNA, and that's our DNA Resource Center. Tim, do you have any parting words?
No, I just really appreciate everybody for taking the time. I do hope it was informative. I hope whatever your interest is, you'll stay in this this fight, as it were. The cause is too important, and this is really a task that's way too big for any one of us to figure out on our own. And if there was ever a need for people to come together, this is it.
Exactly, I agree. Thank you so much, everyone, for signing on today, and have a great afternoon.